It's my great pleasure to be here with the relatively tall Mr. Tim Buckley. If you don't know who this gentleman is, you are going to find out pretty soon. And if you have a look at his LinkedIn profile, you're going to get a real feel for this gentleman. And so you often get confused with being from one particular organization, but what organization are you from?
So I represent Climate Energy Finance, not the CEFC. So we have no government funding. We are a public interest think tank trying to mobilise capital at speed and scale to solve the energy transformation.
And there's a lot of moments when we've been at a 2-day conference. It's been, I wouldn't say particularly scripted, but it's been pretty run of the mill for people who would get together in a certain discipline and talk about the things which they do on a day-to-day basis. But there hasn't been a lot of grist, if you will, around the level of sort of endemic, cataclysmic change or issue that we're facing as a society. When we talk about climate change and we talk about the damage to nations and things like that, what are the things you haven't said at this conference that are like in the back of your mind that really we should be?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I try and find hope and inspiration in my work.
Yeah.
I am looking at the solutions rather than fighting against the problems most of the time. Just that's my nature. And so I naturally gravitate to China. It is just staggering. The speed and the scale and the commitment and the longevity, the long-term thinking that China brings to addressing issues. Energy security is a key issue. That is fundamental driver of the government policy to get off the imported fossil fuels. And so if that means decarbonisation, China is all in.
Yeah.
They build such amazing scale. It is just staggering. Their robotics is staggering. And the technology investment, I think I come from the financial markets, but democracy thinks way too short term. And so China invests in technology, particularly in the energy space, unlike any other country in the world. So that gives me inspiration. There's plenty of negatives about China. Every country's got its own problems, but when it comes to delivering climate solutions at the speed and scale required, I can't go beyond what China is doing. It is staggering.
And specifically, you mentioned the words Trinasolar. I was doing my master's degree in entrepreneurship and innovation with Swinburne. We did an Asia Pacific study tour, and I was in the Trina factory like 12 years ago now. And I came back from that, like visiting Suzhou, seeing what they were building, just being staggered about that scale. And you mentioned during the previous session that Trina has exited the US market.
Yes, so one of the themes of what are the implications of what's happened this week is that capital will flow to where the policy support is and where the interest is. And at the end of the day, we saw last night, Trinasolar announced the sale of their US manufacturing facility, the biggest new solar manufacturing facility brought in by the Chinese without government subsidies, but to address the IRA. In other words, if you can't import, then let's manufacture in America. Trina has sold that factory and exited the US overnight. So that is
overnight.
Yeah, that is
in direct relation.
In direct relation. It's the biggest new solar project, 5 gigawatt solar module manufacturing facility in America, bringing 1,500 new jobs to America. Totally aligned with the IRA. Totally within what the IRA was, but Trina has exited. And so I think capital is going to flow. Australia could well be the beneficiary, because the big question I was getting 3 years ago was, is the IRA going to see the sucking noise of capital leaving Australia to go to America? Well, now if capital is being deployed in solutions, it's actually going to be attracted to Australia if we get the policies right.
And did it? Did it make the capital flow for the last 3 years in your perspective?
I think it has, and I think more importantly, it's actually slowed the deployment of capital here, because capital is borderless in free markets. And so, yes, is the answer.
And this free market thing's interesting, because we're surrounded by people here saying they're looking for long-term investment plays in the infrastructure transition, but they won't do it unless if it's subsidized, because that won't play out over the long term to give them good returns for their shareholders. But then we're competing with China from a manufacturing, a labor, and a technology perspective. So when you were talking about module manufacturing in Australia, what do you see as this hybrid of like, where should we be spending our tax money for the betterment of the nation?
Yeah, ultimately, I'll maybe pick up on the first point you made about a subsidy. We need to subsidise the solutions. And it's a point that Rod Sims made very, very categorically yesterday, and I'll just repeat it. I'll riff off my betters. We need a price on carbon. At the end of the day, we subsidise every unit of fossil fuel production and burning everywhere in the world because we allow it to burn without paying a carbon emissions pollution tax. That then means the government doesn't have the money to actually invest in the solutions or the enabling infrastructure.
And arguably, this gives weight to the term the green premium.
It's effectively, we talk about a green premium, but it's actually just an unpriced externality that is allowing fossil fuels to have a grey discount and therefore be competitive. So unfortunately, that then means in the strength of Australia's fossil fuel industry, we need to fight subsidy with subsidy rather than remove all the subsidies and then let the best technology win, because renewables would win categorically in that situation. But the good news is we have actually seen Trinasolar actually announce it about 2 months ago, a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to co-invest with Trinasolar, with SunDrive, in Australia, to take world-leading technology from the University of New South Wales and to build a solar module manufacturing facility at semi-commercial scale, 1 gigawatt per annum, in New South Wales to create jobs. And that is going to be underpinned by a 10-year production tax credit to subsidise it. Now, that's obviously the question, should private investors be investing in things that need subsidies? As our panel just discussed, competing against China, where they have a scale and a technology basis that is just unstoppable, competing against China is a mug's game. You will lose. So my recommendation to the Australian government is let's invest in partnership with technology leaders. Let's invest and invite China. And so at the moment, the big question in China's mind is Australia actually going to invest or allow them to deploy at scale in Australia? I think Treasurer Chalmers has done a good job so far, but he's got to really answer that, and he's got to nail it and say China is very welcome to invest in partnership with Australian companies to deploy capacity in Australia. That brings world-leading robotics, world-leading technology, world-leading engineering skills, reindustrialises our nation, but we do it majority Australian-owned. So the average punter in Australia doesn't worry about it. But what they should actually see is that embracing with China and deploying capital, creating jobs, creating industry, creating and reskilling our workforce is they're people, and they're our number one trade partner, and we need to work with everyone to deploy the solutions. So I think it'll demystify it and get away from the Murdoch media bullshit, which is that China's the enemy. China is our number one trade partner. We've got to embrace them. We've got to actually stand up for our interests, as Foreign Minister Penny Wong says, but we need to actually collaborate with our number one trade partner, and they can bring enormous strengths and complementarity to our country. And we should embrace anyone that wants to invest in Australia at speed and scale in good solutions.
You're obviously a very smart person, because this all makes sense on paper. I was at the AICD when they had a national conference on ASEAN 2020, like in 2008, I think it was. This is very, obvious. We're not America. America is heading arguably down an isolationist path, and so our place in the bottom half of Asia, where we have been for millions of years, is still the same place. What do you think's missing with everybody's ability to go, oh, let's do this, let's chart a path where we are an integrated Asian neighbor? And does our labor force want to go back to manufacturing? Because in the past 2 decades of my life, I have seen that removal of manufacturing, the offshoring of it. Is it realistic that we're going to go from an extractive, over-financialized economy back into where we're all, hard at work on the tools, for want of a better term?
I think the opportunity for Australia to do some reindustrialisation in partnership with world technology leaders in the Australian context is absolutely in our national interest. But maybe picking up on the Productivity Commission says we've got to play to our competitive advantages. I disagree with that. I think we need to extend our competitive advantages. We know we are a potential renewable energy superpower. We've got no way of getting it to our customers in Asia unless we embody it in our critical minerals and strategic metals. So we heard from the Aluminium Council, Margie, the CEO there, talking about, well, green aluminium is one of Australia's most value-added products, and it is absolutely perfect as an example of exporting embodied decarbonisation and helping our trade partners decarbonise their economies. Now, that brings with it thousands or tens of thousands of high-value jobs to Australia. And that's what Rio Tinto is doing up at Gladstone. They're actually cementing 20 years of certainty for the workers of Gladstone, and they're providing the world with the value-added, zero-emissions, green aluminium we need. I'm working on green iron at the moment. That is all about collaborating with Japan, China, Korea, Taiwan, India, and working with those steel countries and companies and helping them decarbonize their economies. We're very different to America. We need to acknowledge that. America's got a massive domestic market. They can reindustrialize and put up the trade barriers and have the domestic demand pool. We don't have that, but we are an export nation. Let's play to that strength. And in exports, we play at world scale. We're a world leader in iron ore, in lithium, in LNG, in coking coal. Let's play to that. But where I do disagree with the Productivity Commission, we need to value add it before we export it, because at the moment, even in international trade, there's an unpriced externality called carbon emissions. And so we as a country need the Trade Minister, Don Farrell. We need the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, to actually push China, Japan and Korea to embrace the need for an Asian CBAM, to leverage the leadership of the EU CBAM, create the price signal, and then Australia can actually go all in on that, and we can see the flow of investments, jobs, exports, and make our economy more sustainable and help solve the global climate crisis at world scale.
And not that they need green ore or green iron or green steel, particularly in Europe. Maybe they do, but they do price in the externality when it gets to their border, as you mentioned, the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So there is this environment being set up around us, and we know what we need to do. We know what people need in the future. I loved when the previous presenter talked about, if you show me your balance sheet, or show me your revenue, I'll tell you where you are. And if you show me your CapEx, I'll show you where you're going.
Follow the money, follow the CapEx. It's where companies are investing at speed and scale in solutions. And so I would look at, say, a Rio Tinto. They're actually investing very serious money, not as much as Fortescue. Fortescue's a leader, but Fortescue can't go alone. We need BHP and Rio to actually follow and crowd in their balance sheets. And if they spend the CapEx, that will move the dial. But as BHP and Rio says, they operate for shareholders. They have to actually adjust for risk-adjusted returns. And we need the price on carbon in their key markets. They're an export companies. Until there's an Asian CBAM or equivalent price signal, it's going to be very hard. They're not going to do it for all. They can't price. They can't get paid for making the investment. Now, I would therefore argue that's where our taxpayer dollars will be really well invested for Minister Bowen and his colleagues, Minister Husic. Most importantly, follow the money. The Treasurer needs to actually dip into our children's taxes to actually make sure we actually are providing the solutions Asia needs. And until there's a price on carbon, we're going to have to subsidise it. But that will get us up the learning curve. Things like green iron are literally a $250 billion investment opportunity that will make Australia a great nation and bring home Ross Garnaut's pitch that we could be a renewable energy superpower. We're nowhere near there now, but we could still be there. We absolutely can get in the race. But as Guy Debelle said, we're not even at the bloody start line, whereas China's already racing at 1 million miles an hour. We need to get our shoes on, get in the line and get moving, and that requires Team Australia. We categorically need BHP, Rio, Fortescue, Hancock, working with the state government, working with the federal government, working with all of their key customers who are aligned on the science, and Team Australia will win, I have zero doubt.
And then the Productivity Commission will be able to talk about the things we have strengths in that we are doubling down on.
And that we have built competitive advantage. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Brilliant. Thank you.